All right, welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Sumedh Chaudhry, the co-founder at DevBytes, Cricketpedia, and NewsBytes. And NewsBytes will really be the company that we focus on today. But Sumedh, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chase. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So you are the first Indian entrepreneur that we've had on the podcast, Indian founder. And I really like to start with a bit of the background on kind of what it's like to be an entrepreneur there. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages? So if I had to kind of nail down the first question for you, it would be just what is it like being an Indian entrepreneur today versus when you first got into entrepreneurship in India? Is the environment more supportive? Is it more common to be a founder of a company? Because obviously entrepreneurship has gone a bit mainstream in the last decade, but you've been at it for a while. So how has the entrepreneurship game in India changed since when you started and where you are today?
That's a great question. So let me start by giving a bit of my introduction.
Please.
So I'm an engineer by profession. I did MBA from one of the schools in India. And during my MBA, I went to US for a 3 month transfer program. And at that point of time, we went to Valley, we went a couple of places, and I saw that the kind of energy that was booming way back in 2010, 2011. At that point of time in India, entrepreneurship was still a new thing. A digital entrepreneurship was a new thing to come in India. So we had our first wave of entrepreneurs in 2008 when I was studying in an engineering school. But when we started in 2015, we had slightly more mature ecosystem. But now, in the past 7 years, the game has totally changed. Everyone wants to be in India. Everyone wants to target India. Whether you are if you are a SaaS company, you want to build from India. If you're a consumer tech, you want to be in India because of our share size and the kind of free market we have compared to other nations. So I started my entrepreneurship journey in 2015, and in the past 7, 8 years, it has completely changed. Now, Indian parents who used to be risk averse are okay with their kids taking that step of entrepreneurship.
That's great.
VCs, yeah, that's definitely a big change. And more than that, we have seen certain good liquidity events in India, not only for founders, but for the people who started with those founders who were the employee number 130, 100. And these have really made us believe in that Indian story. And at the end of the day, we have seen lots and lots of innovation coming from India, especially in the fintech sector or in sectors which were not where there were not solutions which were comparable compared to the West. So I think it's a great time for any Indian entrepreneur to start his journey. We as a bunch are very scrappy in nature, that we will keep on going on, because we have to deal with so many regulations, so many laws. It makes us tough to start, but it's a great time given the kind of scene, the tech talent we have right now.
And I imagine there are some advantages and disadvantages to starting a company in India. Perhaps one of the advantages is maybe lower developer costs. Maybe there's more affordable development costs there. Certainly, a lot of American tech companies outsource their development work all over the place, India, Ukraine, Bangladesh, all over the place these days. And I'd imagine it's a huge market. You know, if a product like NewsBytes, for example, takes off, you have a lot of users that could potentially, start to join the platform. So can you just speak to maybe what you think some of the advantages of being a founder in India is versus, say, the United States?
Definitely. So the first point, if you would have asked me 4 or 5 years back that it's easier to attract talent in India, I would have agreed 100%. But the last 4 years have completely changed. Now the bigger Indian companies have started outsourcing their work to other nations.
Oh,
So
wow.
the developers cost, the elite developers are now demanding salaries which are comparable to the West.
Mm.
And they definitely now know, given the COVID situation, everyone realized that they can work from home, still earn global salaries. So that has changed. So it's funny that I think a couple of years back, the CEO of one of the largest Indian ride-sharing companies tweeted in a funny manner that he's opening a Silicon Valley office because it's cheaper to hire engineers from there.
Nice. And
but but it's still there is good talent out here. If you know how to hire, you can still find good talent at affordable prices.
okay. And we recently had on Logan Underwood, who's a Canadian entrepreneur, and he was talking about this dynamic that you kind of touched on earlier, where Canadians tend to be a little bit more risk adverse than the US entrepreneurs. And we were talking about maybe some of that is a bit of naivete on the part of US founders, maybe even a bit of, healthy or unhealthy arrogance that, they can be the startup founder. And he was talking about how Canadians tend to see themselves more as like an employee number 5 at a big company and not necessarily the founders themselves. And you mentioned how one of the changes that's happened in India is that the parents, and perhaps it's from seeing the success and the liquidity events of some of these other companies, they're starting to allow their children, or maybe encourage, you'll explain to me what the culture is like there, but they're starting to encourage their children to maybe be a little bit more risk adverse, or sorry, less risk adverse, and take these chances to start companies. Can you talk about maybe the mind of an Indian parent, and how that dynamic has changed in recent years?
Right. So I think one of the best things I like about US entrepreneurs is their capacity to take risk. And that's, I think, because you have seen lots and lots of success story since the last 50, 60 years. And as we are getting our own local heroes and our own local stories, we are also getting to know that tech is a great leveler. Even if you fail at your venture, you're not a failed entrepreneur. You are an entrepreneur whose business couldn't scale. You still have the skills to get employed another company. So that kind of a mindset definitely is coming. And but there are so the best part is that 10 years back, this mindset or something of that mindset was only in a couple of cities in India. Now the tier two, tier three cities, people are also getting to take that risk. Coming to Indian parents, I just mentioned they have become less risk. They want their kids to take more risk, but they still will want to hold them back. There are most of them who want their kids to take government jobs, have a stable career, but that is changing. But if you're from a privileged background, if you have gone to one of the good schools, engineering or B schools, you see that there is a different level of energy on ground. So I think another 10 years, we will see an India which is impossible to kind of imagine right now.
Okay, and one last question on this front before we turn to NewsBytes is the fundraising environment in India. I'd imagine that it's still mostly kind of friends, family, and local angel investors, but I do know there's a lot of investors from the United States or from the West that like to invest in India and other, quote unquote, emerging markets. So, do you see a lot of foreign investment coming into early stage startups in India, or is it still mostly just angel investors out of India and friends and family rounds?
So actually, it's quite the opposite. Fundraising for a good company is not a problem at all. It's not a problem. So we have all the global VCs with their shops in India. So you talk about, so Sequoia was probably one of the most active investor last year. We have Tiger Global has really invested in India. SoftBank is there. We have Lightspeed, ASL, you name it. We have all the bigger institutional funds putting money in India. As an entrepreneur, we have raised our money, Series A and A plus kind of a round from foreign investors. So there is actually no dearth of capital for the right idea or the right team in India. So that and these days actually people tend to skip that family and friends round because a lot of YC kind of models have come in India. So Sequoia started something specifically for India and Southeast Asia called Sequoia Surge, which is for that family and funds kind of around. So I don't think foreign capital is a problem, but of course, one of the disadvantages starting from India is a little vagueness of the laws in India. So that at times is a deterrent, but there are ways around. So lots of companies incorporate in US or Singapore, and then they have a subsidiary in India, and then they run around it. But of course, the government is also changing its mindset towards entrepreneurship, and I think within a couple of years we will see more founder-friendly norms.
Okay, cool. So let's turn to NewsBytes now, which is kind of your risk as a founder. Why don't you tell us a bit about NewsBytes? I'll briefly mention that in previous conversations you described NewsBytes as India's first explanatory journalism portal, and that it's meant to mimic. It's an AI model that mimics trustworthy journalists in each vertical, and creates journalism for each topic, kind of with this AI model mimicking other trustworthy journalists that it has kind of scraped or is mimicking from across the web. So that's kind of my starting point. Why don't you go ahead and explain a bit more about NewsBytes?
Sure. So we are actually, as a company, we are a tech company in the business of media. We are not a media company using technology. So that's a very big distinction that we always tell about ourselves when we are compared to other media houses in India. And to be fair, I don't like the word journalism to be associated with us because while growing up, I always felt that journalism was something which people were doing on ground, doing investigative journalism, which really is kind of helping the society. We are more of a media tech, content tech company. So of course we use AI. We have been using generative AI before it was cool to do that. So we created our AI engine way back in 2018, and like you mentioned that it is not a generic model. We do not claim to have created an AI model which can write a job description as well as answer your queries like ChatGPT. No, we created an AI engine with a very specific use case in mind. That is to create news which is trustworthy and which can be published with minimal human intervention. And so that's how we created our AI engine. We have been using parts and bits of it since 2018. If you go to newsbytesapp.com right now, there are beats, there are categories which are almost automated with minimal human intervention. But then there are categories where we have journalists who are digital journalists who are writing content with the help of engine. So we have the whole spectrum. But like you mentioned, whenever we create a new model for our engine, we try to mimic the writing style as well as the thinking style of a journalist who had worked with us or who is the best in that beat. And that's how we do that. Recently, with NewsBytes, what we have done is we have been doing generative AI for text for some time. For the past 1.5 years, we have been putting our energies to do generative AI for videos. And we have just created our first product where, for instance, if I have this podcast, if I take 15 minutes of your recording, I can build an AI model for you, an AI avatar for you, and then I can just input text to convert this podcast into several languages to make you as a news anchor for NewsBytes and other things. But the idea is that generative AI is what we believe is the key here, whether it is text, video, audio, etc.
Okay, and so let's dig into how one of these digital journalists that works at NewsBytes would actually interact with this AI model. So, for example, would they prompt the AI model with a headline that they wrote themselves, and then the AI model would generate a story, and then they would kind of edit and clean it up afterwards? Or are they going line by line, kind of as a back and forth interactive experience with the AI model? Can you kind of explain how a journalist would use from start to finish the AI model in creating a piece on NewsBytes?
Right. So there are the journey starts from selecting a content. So we have a content sourcing module, which is also um, kind of AI based, NLP based to be precise, which helps our journalists to take decisions on what thing they should write a content. But the selection is theirs. They make a decision that they want to write about XYZ. Once they do that, they give a prompt on our content panel, on our content management system that they want to write it. They select a particular model which can write that kind of a news. So, for instance, if they are writing about a gadget launch, there would be a different AI model as against elections or a cricket story or a football story.
Hmm.
That process is manual, um, not because of the technology reason, but more about because of the copyright laws. But that's how it is. And once they give that prompt, the whole article gets created. Then the journalist edits the copy, cleans the copy, and publishes it. That's how it's not a chatbot where it's constantly interacting with it, but it's more of that they decide on what content they need to write. They give the prompt to write, and the article gets created.
Okay, and obviously with these kind of models, feedback loops and inputs are really important. So let's say that that journalist has to make some edits, some cleanup, as you kind of referred to it. Does that finished product then get fed back into the AI and say, here's what we wanted you to get to with your previous
Right,
version? Yeah.
right. So it's a self-learning platform where we are actually measuring, or we are actually thinking about every step that the editor is taking, and we are using that thing to make the system better.
Okay. And are you able to measure I guess what you're going for is trustworthiness above all else, it sounds like. That's why you're mimicking
Right.
trustworthy journalists. Do you have a way of measuring that? And I ask obviously because of our background at Credder. I'm gonna kind of dig into this whole concept of trust now and what kind of inputs and outputs you guys are thinking about. So how do you know whether you're creating that trustworthy piece of journalism? Is it anecdotal that you and your team members read it and find it trustworthy yourselves, and so it's good enough? Are you looking for engagement as some kind of a measurement, or are you actually somehow able to measure the trustworthiness?
So the first thing that we do is that as a company, we want to state facts and not opinion. And that's a very big challenge, whether you are using an AI model system or a human, because our inherent biases are there. Because even the person who is training that AI model has biases. So one of the things that we definitely do is be as close to stating facts as possible, and we do that is measuring how was the tonality of that article, whether that article was telling about opinion somewhere without us mentioning that this is an opinion piece. If it has to go under a news piece, it has to be completely non-opinionated factual piece. That's my first part of the trustworthiness. Second, of course, is um, the AI. Any news-based AI needs data or input to create that article. and we make sure that we take the data from the most trustworthy sources. That's one of the other bit. But if you ask me, because we when we talked about the whole Credder, we are not measuring like the way you measure. So it's not more of a critic's view of that, but that's something we would love to explore. Right now, it bases on two: how less opinionated an article is, and how close to the stating the facts it is, the tonality of that, and second is about the trustworthy sources.
Okay, and then maybe this is the last question on this kind of nuance here, but it's mimicking, like you said, trustworthy sources, kind of the tone and writing style of these sources. And you mentioned how you tend to mimic either journalists that have worked with you in the past or are leaders in a certain vertical. I'm just curious how you guys determine who the leaders are in each vertical. Is it just kind of you take the top two most widely read journalists in each vertical, and there's kind of a baked in assumption that those are the most credible voices in the space because they have the most reach? How do you guys kind of decide who to mimic?
So I think it's a very important and a nuanced approach. I don't think the most read article about anything would be a fact-based piece. It will always be an opinion,
That's a good
because
point. Yeah.
because in media we tend to just look for articles which confirm our bias. So for us, it's more about finding. But if you are very particular about finding a fact-based piece from 10 different sources or 10 different journalists, it will tend to give you the same kind of an information. And that's why mimicking a fact-based piece without an opinion is not from any source, any trustworthy journalist. It's not very difficult, because at the end of the day, our humans mind work in a certain way where we are just stating certain facts and not opinion. And of course, if it's about an opinion, that's a completely different story, because it becomes about storytelling. It's becomes about what I believe the reality of that event is.
Okay. And if you know, you're obviously very deep in the space, and the whole generative AI topic is hotter than ever right now. But I'm curious if you could draw a line in the sand for where AI will be able to do, you know, X amount of journalism jobs, but then Y is the journalism jobs where humans will still be required. What role do you think humans will continue to have to be involved in when it comes to the news industry? Are there any roles that are completely safe, or is it really just a matter of time before AI can do reasonably well any role within a newsroom?
So I will answer this question from two perspectives. So even before me being an entrepreneur, I am a geek or a nerd. So I am an absolute believer in technology. So in my sci-fi world, sooner or later we will reach AGI, and then it would be we would be able to create machines which are at a human intelligence level. That's my fantasy, or that's my dream of how humankind will evolve. But keeping the nerdiness aside, as an entrepreneur, as a media entrepreneur, I think one of the ways where, as a company, we believe, so we talk to lots of media houses, the editors. We also talk to a lot of techies, engineers, and they are at the two end of the spectrum. Techies believe that they can come in, they can create a model and take all the jobs of journalists, while journalists believes that machines can't do anything. None of that is truth. The actual utopia lies when we let machines do repetitive jobs and let humans do things which they are good at. So, for instance, And this is the harsh reality that if you look at any media house in India and US, which is a digital media house relying on ad revenue, they will create, if they create 100 pieces every day, 80 would be for traffic, for Google traffic, and 20 would be for good pieces where they are giving informative, explanatory journalism or investigative. So I think those 80 pieces where a lot of human resources are going on can be automated to a level where we do not have to do meaningless job, but wherever we require human mind, whether it is empathy to write that article or we need certain nuance to write that article, those jobs are safe, of course. Uh, like I said, that journalism is not only about throwing content. So Google is not a journalism company, right? It's an information company. So I think it would be always, we believe that humans and AI have to work hand in hand to create an experience which is good for everyone. So you write pieces, you create content at scale for where you are doing informative pieces where a college graduate doesn't have to waste his time writing things which can be written by humans, but there are things which will always remain journalist dependent.
Okay, so just to double click on this concept, because I was thinking about this before we started recording, I was thinking, what jobs do I think AI perhaps cannot do in the newsroom? And one of the things I kept thinking about was the idea of the investigative reporter, the person who's chasing down a story that, doesn't yet exist on the internet and so is therefore not able to be crawled by an AI because the story is still hidden. It's still like in bits and fragments, and you need to go hunt down sources for comment and uncover new information. But then the techie nerd in me was thinking, well, with things like ChatGPT or these kind of chat type interfaces of AI, technically you could have an AI investigative reporter that knows who to reach out to for comment, sends an email to them for comment, pieces together the information, contextualizes it. So perhaps even the work of an investigative reporter could someday be done by an AI that has the ability to kind of go off and reach out to sources on its own. Any thoughts on that?
So I personally don't think we have reached that level. So I, I think ChatGPT is a beautiful product, and I'm using beautiful because it has been created in such a great manner that it tells the beauty of AI. But it's still a large language model. It's still being trained on a database, and it doesn't know how to use certain applications. So, for instance, ChatGPT cannot use Google Calendar. It doesn't have or calculator, etc. Right now, I don't think we have reached a level where a story where only a good investigative journalist can sniff and find out. We have reached that level. So I don't think that job is under threat at all. Even I will go a step forward. Uh, so, for instance, a day. So let's say today a new phone comes, a flagship phone comes, right? After a week or two, probably good AI can write a very good review piece based on all the reviews that users have given on Reddit, Twitter, etc. Combine it, and that's the power of what you guys are also doing, right? So, for instance, IMDb is way more powerful than any critic's review of a film. So, similarly, in that 24 hours, 48 hours, that machine can write it. But writing on the day of launch, the look and feel of that particular new phone, still, the machine can't feel that phone, right? Two same phone with the same specifications are not equal. Uh, unless that the machine has that data, they can't write it. and human can create that data through experiencing that thing.
Mm.
So I think there are lots and lots of jobs which will not be which are safe. The problem with the whole media sector is that they overhype and underhype a lot of things.
Yeah.
So with the BuzzFeed going and saying that they will use lots of AI to create content, it becomes more of a that every job is unsafe, or they will go 3 months down the line that because now a lot of problems of ChatGPT are coming up. And I think, to be fair, OpenAI and Sam Altman were very clear that this is not AGI, this is nothing, this is a good language model. And when media is discovering that, they are now underplaying it. Neither is true.
Right.
We are still away from that state where such big jobs are under threat.
Okay, so we've kind of just spent the last 10 minutes or so talking about AI coming for human jobs, and what I wanted to talk next about is AI coming for AI jobs. Okay, so there's this this understanding, or this concept that artificial intelligence and these kind of large language models will eventually become commoditized, and there will be so many of them competing that and so many of them that can work on so many different verticals that the price comes down so low, the accessibility comes down so low that it will be available for a lot of people. So I want to get your thoughts on the commoditization of these tools, but also uh specifically towards NewsBytes. So now we see ChatGPT, and NewsBytes has been doing this AI generated journalism for a while now. So let me ask: is there something defensive about NewsBytes that, for example, somebody couldn't just now, using ChatGPT, spin up a website and ask ChatGPT to basically write articles in the same style as NewsBytes and create the same stories and have a website that has maybe not the level of community that you've built up, but could theoretically kind of jump quickly to the type of platform that you guys have built? Is this something that NewsBytes can protect itself against? And is AI coming for, is the best days AI always going to eat away the tools of the previous version's AI?
Right. So, you have asked two questions. The
Yeah.
first one about the commoditization of LLMs. I completely believe that that is where we are heading,
Okay.
and that's how everyone. So we will have a. It will become more of what we had like APIs, right? So everyone will have certain different LLMs with their own speciality, and then a central kind of a system where you can uh, interact with them. So definitely, if LLMs have to grow, the interface will become really important. So I think that, and you would know this, that GPT-3 and Chat GPT are not massively different in terms of technology, but they are massively different in terms of popularity because of the interface ChatGPT had. So I think, of course, LLMs will become a commodity. The prices will go down, and the person who will win that kind of a market is the company with the best interface to interact with those LLMs. Or so there would be two parts, right? It will more become like a cloud computing right now. That anybody can use AWS to spin up a server. Similarly, you would be able to do use any of the LLM services. Now, coming to the second part of the question, right now, the biggest defensibility for us is not so. For my reader, it doesn't matter whether I am creating a content using AI or I am employing humans to create that content, right? At the end, the person has to find that content useful in a very friendly manner and is able to read that content. So apart from our ability to generate content at low cost, our philosophy of what our editorial philosophy is, keeps us better or keeps us ahead of the competition. So, for instance, if you go to any media house and talk to their editor in chief, they will say that they want their loyal readers to read the article from top to bottom, each word. We say that it's impossible to change the behavior of users. We are living in the world of Instagram Reels and TikToks. 30 seconds, they get all the information. So it's better you create content which is easy to skim. So if you download our Android app or if you go to our website, we have created the content, we have divided the content into parts where it's very easy to skim. So not only our content creation is the key, how we present it is also what makes us different. And right now, from an AI perspective, our defensibility is that we have a very high efficacy model because uh, de- we are using AI just to write that newsy content. And that too, we have different models to write that. It's not a single model, and user is still selecting which model to use to create a particular content. So right now it's that, but the way the market is moving, I will not be surprised if we have AI which can create great quality content at there then and there. Right now, it's very difficult. So you would know that uh, all the GPT-3 is trained on 20 till data on 2020. So the news that comes today, it's difficult to write that kind of a news, but of course it can happen.
Okay, and so kind of one of the key takeaways you mentioned there is that the interface is one of the main differentiators going forward for these types of businesses, platforms, content businesses. So I guess in the stack, it sounds like you would say, okay, the AI, whatever tool you're using, whatever AI API you're using is kind of in the middle. And on one end, you have the user experience side, which is the interface. But then in front of that, kind of on the other side of the sandwich, would be the database that the API and the AI has access to inform it, the inputs to the model. So do you think that one of the other big differentiators in this game is going to be exclusivity of access to certain databases? So for example, let's say Google's trying to, compete now quickly with this ChatGPT. What if they went and exclusively paid for access to Quora's question and answer results? That would probably be a nice database for them to not only have to inform their AI tool, but to make sure that nobody else has. So how important do you think exclusivity of databases is going to be kind of part of this game?
So honestly, I don't think we are heading in a direction where we will be competing on the exclusivity of how that data has been trained. Because at the end of the day, and let's talk about, um, let's say Bing, Microsoft wants to have an exclusive contract with Quora. So will Quora stop Google from indexing its content? Probably not, because it's a big traffic generator for Quora, right? So right now, I agree with that part that there might be certain exclusive databases, high end databases, which uh, can help you answer certain kinds of questions. But overall, on a training perspective, I think exclusivity of that will not play a part. What will play a part is how well your trained data is labeled, how well your data is trained. And it's not only about the billion or the trillion, whatever GPT-4 will say, parameters. It's how they are now labeling or training that is. The bigger the model is not necessarily the better model, but we are going in a direction where um, I think it will my personal thing is that it's the front end for the interfaces that will be the key factor.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on, but just to play devil's advocate for 1 second on that point, I agree that if I'm Quora, the business, I have an incentive to work with both Microsoft and Google. But I would also argue that if I'm Google or Microsoft, I have an incentive to, if I can't purchase exclusivity, I can potentially acquire Quora to, make sure that that database belongs to just my ChatGPT model. So I do think that there's going to be some interesting acquisitions in this space as Microsoft and Google kind of kick back off this search rivalry. I do think that there will be some important databases that get swallowed up in order to ensure exclusivity. And I think those could be big hits to the business that isn't proactive on that front. Okay, so I want to turn back to NewsBytes, the business now. We've talked about the technology and the platform. How does NewsBytes support itself in from a revenue model standpoint? Because obviously, as you mentioned, you're a tech company first that deals with content. I'd imagine that there's a lot of enterprise applications for this tool. So are you working with other content platforms? Are you working with other enterprise businesses? Is there a direct to consumer revenue model? How does NewsBytes support itself?
Like I mentioned, that we are a tech company first. We started NewsBytes as a platform, and we have grown to a good scale in India. So we now do more than 500 million page views every month, almost half a billion page views every month. So we generate most of our revenue from ads, Google AdSense, direct sales, Google AdX. That's our revenue model. We tried venturing into SaaS play for content creators. Uh, we onboarded a couple of clients for the same, but we soon realized that at the heart we are a B2C company. And at our stage, with our limited resources, you cannot be both a B2C and a B2B company. So we decided not to pursue B2B SaaS play for content creators. And thankfully, that was a great decision with all the LLMs coming up. So are now, so we have a very strong thesis on how the media market is now moving, and that's how we are now expanding. So we believe that verticalization of media will happen. Whether it's news content or normal content, that will happen. And what do I mean by verticalization is what we saw with social media, right? Initially, there was only one big giant social media platform, Facebook. Then we saw the second order social media like Instagram for photo sharing, Twitter for something, etc. And now it has become very specific. Gaming guys will have a different social media. Discord plays a different part. The same thing will happen with all the content platforms. So, for instance, if I have to describe myself, or if I ask you, how would you describe yourself? You will use three or four words, which would usually be, so for me, for instance, they are entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I am a father to a young son. I am third would be a cricket buff. I'm a family man. These kind of things, right? And each of these words have a potential to be a content platform or a community which is driven by content. So for as an entrepreneur, I have a community of my entrepreneurs where I ask them advice, I consume content together with them, etc. Similarly, for being a cricket fan, or if you ask my wife, she has a very strong community of working women who are also young mothers, right? So that is the potential where we are going ahead with. We recently launched something called DevBytes, which is a content platform exclusively for developers. We create content, we still use technology, we create short form content, but that content is only for developers, product managers. It helps them satisfy all their content needs on the professional front. So we have an extension for them. We have an Android app, and as soon as they download, all they get is uh, the content which matters to them in their professional life. And then we are building community out of it. Similarly, we want to do for every vertical community, taking the technology as a base. And in most of the cases, it would be ad driven model, or it can be direct sales, it can be affiliate marketing, etc.
Okay. Um, are there any other, aspects of the platform or the business that you guys are really, ambitious towards in 2023 or in the next couple of years here? Like, I guess I would ask, how happy are you with the state of the product today versus where you want it to go? And is it going to look very different a couple of years from now?
Definitely. I think 2023 would be it's a challenging year for us, given how the market is moving, but it will be a breakthrough year for us the way our plans are. So currently we have our products in four languages, and there are overall six different desks. At the end of the year, there would be 10 products that we would have. We have, like I mentioned, we have just launched our generative video AI solution. So all of the hard work that we have been doing for the past 18, 24 months is accumulating. I think we would be a very different company in 18 months of time.
Okay, and you've seen the episode before, so we're about to turn to the last two questions I ask every guest. But before we do, why don't you give listeners a few places, a couple links maybe that they can follow you and the work you're doing, and I'll make sure to include those in the show notes.
Sure. So I am not active on any social media. I am just a old guy with who answers every email that he gets. My email ID is my first name dot my second name at the rate newsbytesapp.com. It's SUMEDH dot CHAUDHRY at the rate newsbytesapp.com. Um, if anyone is interested in knowing more about what we are doing, if anyone is interested in working with us, more than happy to set up a call. Just reach out to my email. I always answer all my emails.
Okay, great. And now for the last two questions. Let me ask, did you see all the way to the end of that episode with Andrew Gazdecki? Did you hear what the
Yes.
last two questions are? Okay, so you're a
Yeah.
little bit prepared here, but Bitcoin, what are your thoughts on Bitcoin? I know gold is big in India. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin as a, potential digital gold?
I believe in Bitcoin. So that's my one line answer. I think the thesis of that product is very strong. And whatever has happened in last 12 months, it will look like a very small asterisk in the future of Bitcoin. I'm a believer in that whole technology.
Okay, cool. I tend to agree, but let me ask, what is the impression on the ground in India? In the US, we're pretty early adopter of these types of technologies, and there's a pretty well growing community of Bitcoiners and other cryptos. But if we're just focusing on the Bitcoin community, how is Bitcoin being received in India amongst young people, older people, all generations?
So it's like this that in the past 3 years it has gone through its own hype and boom cycle. If if we were talking 12 or 18 months back, there were lots and lots of Web3 startups that were coming from India. They were incorporating in Dubai, but they were coming out of India. And we have some great companies in this space, for example, Polygon from India. Uh, so overall, I think the younger generation believes in the concept of that,
Hmm.
of a decentralized world. Right now, there has been, so I think a lot of things that happened in during the hype market was useless application of Web3. So not every application requires decentralization. That's my belief.
I agree.
Uh, but what we saw in the hype market, that everything which we had in Web 2, we were trying to reinvent the wheel in Web 3.
Yeah.
So I think that's the only problem that this cycle will see. But wherever decentralization will is required, it will happen. And I think Indian techies are a very strong believers of this technology, and you will see lots of indie developers working on their own projects on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said there. I think blockchain is essentially a slow, expensive, but secure way to manage a database, and that, that doesn't have infinite applications. There are a lot of databases that are better suited for speed and cost efficiency, and that perhaps a decentralized form of money or store of value is maybe, one of the best use cases, if not one of the few real use cases for, a decentralized blockchain.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
last question for you here is, are we living in a simulation? Feel free to let that tech nerd fly.
So that's where I don't think we are living in a simulation. So I've read a lots of interviews on that, where people say that if a person says that he is not living in a simulation, he is definitely living in a simulation. But let's see, um, even though it's very terrifying that if we are alone, there are no aliens. But I believe that there are aliens, we have just not found them.
Okay, so not in a simulation, and there are aliens, we just haven't met them yet. I
Yeah.
love it. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great to learn more about you, about the Indian founder startup scene, about NewsBytes, and this really hot generative AI space. And I hope you get to take advantage of the hype cycle, and then not be hurt at all by the doom cycle, which is inevitably around the corner. So thank you so much for
Definitely.
taking the time.
Thanks a lot. It was pleasure to talk to you.